This video is in no way, shape, or form sponsored by Bohemia Interactive or anyone else. All opinions are my own. Hello and welcome to PTSD Simulator, the massive military sandbox game where you die to IEDs every 15 seconds. Arma 3 is a game that boasts nearly 3 million players on Steam, but before you buy this game, we need to go over the basics so you're not confused and just quit after a few hours and beg for your money back because you didn't know what you were doing. So I'm going to help you get into the game and prove to you why buying this game is worth it. So the game is mostly a sandbox game, allowing you to create and share missions with your friends and play random missions created by other people who play the game. When you first boot up the game, I suggest you try out Boot Camp. First learn the basics of how the game will operate. Then after that, you can go into Eden Editor and create your own missions and fool around there. Also, a great feature the game has is having multiple factions that you can change to be either friend or foe. The base factions are NATO, which is comprised of British and American forces, CSAT, which is made up of Iran and China, AAF, who is a native military to the island of Altus and Stratus, more on that later, and the FIA Guerrillas, which is made up of guerrilla fighters that can be an opposition force to all forces depending on the situation, and finally civilians. The base maps are Altus, which stretches across 270 square kilometers, and Stratus, a small island to the south of Altus, that houses the AAF airbase. There is another map, Malden 2035, but we'll touch on that later. Like I stated earlier, Arma 3 is a military sandbox, so there are many realistic attributes, but at the end of the day, it is just a sandbox game and not a simulator. The base game without any mods has multiple stances that you can use in a gunfight to either get cover or find a way to return fire. The guns are all very realistic and have bullet drop, wind resistance, and armor simulating how they would be in real life. For example, if I have a sniper and I'm about 1 kilometer away from my target, I'm going to have to take bullet drop into consideration and adjust accordingly. Another example is ballistics. If I'm raiding a house and clearing rooms and the enemy decides to shoot through the door or wall, the bullet may pass through based on the type of caliber the gun is using. In the base game, there are tons of vehicles ranging from a little dinghy to a 1-ton war machine that can shrug off a missile from a helicopter. Most land-based vehicles have the same control scheme. However, when we get into helicopters, planes, and drones, that's when things can get tricky. For instance, helicopters are quite hard to control for a beginner, but with some time and fooling around in scenarios, you can get the hang of things. As for planes, they function as they would in most other games, but with the added realism of realistic speeds, flat movement, and weapon handling. As for drones, they're a combination of the two. There are 3 maps in the base game of Arma. Altus is a massive Mediterranean island with a few Greek ruins scattered around the map. It also has a few large cities like Kavala, Sirta, and Pygros. Stratus, on the other hand, only has a small fishing town and is instead littered with military bases and outposts for NATO and AAF forces. But if you want small and fast-paced skirmishes, I would choose Stratus for its wooded areas and small size, with many outposts that are within walking distance to each other. And I know some of you will say, there's 3 maps, but you only went over 2 maps. Virtual reality fucking sucks. Just look at this. There's nothing there. For those who are easily turned away by microtransactions and other forms of DLC, I can promise you that the DLC that Arma 3 has is definitely worth it, if you decide to buy it. You can always just instead try out the mod selection. Now, the first big DLC from Arma 3 was Apex, and Apex is set out in southeastern Asia on the islands of Tanoa. This is more of a rainforesty type map with dense jungles and dirt roads. The second map added to Arma 3 was Malden 2035, which is a remake of the map from Operation Flashpoint. For those who don't know, Operation Flashpoint was Arma 1. And has the main island of Malden, but also has another smaller island to the east of Malden that houses a military base, and to the northwest of Malden is a smaller island which also houses a military base, but also has an airport. There's another map called Livonia from the First Contact DLC, and you could already probably tell just by the name of the DLC that it's based around aliens. I personally haven't bought this DLC just yet, but from what I've seen and heard, the map is in Eastern Europe and has lots of dense woodlands and also a few small cities in which you can create battles against NATO and Russian forces. In the First Contact DLC, Russian forces were introduced. Other than that, the other maps were from mod packs. Now, you've heard me mention mods multiple times throughout each section, but this is where Arma 3 truly shines the brightest above other military sandboxes. The mods that you can get from both the Steam Workshop and independent creators. But I really wouldn't trust any third-party websites for mods. I personally only use the Steam Workshop mods. These mods can have a massive impact on the gameplay. For instance, if I could use the mod Ace, but my stupid computer keeps crashing whenever I load it, the sandbox of the game would change immensely, from just a complex sandbox to a full-blown realistic simulator. Also, my friends over at Legion Base that made the Star Wars mod that lets you play as a clone or droid in the Clone Wars, or even Red Hammer Studios, that introduced even more factions with the US Marines, Russian forces, this mod came out before First Contact by the way, Iranian forces, and other Eastern European forces. And finally, the Community Upgrade Project, which has made multiple map packs, multiple factions, and more vehicles, and also includes buildings for you to use in scenarios. And ultimately, the mods are for you to create your own missions. Now that you've made it this far, let's talk about the downsides that Arma 3 brings with it. And most of the things have already been said, and hopefully when Arma 4 comes out in the next few years, all these issues are fixed. But the main problems people have with the game are performance issues, for instance FPS problems and requirements to run the game. And before you think you'll need a monstrous PC to even run the base game, you don't. It's just the mods can sometimes be a hassle to run. However, with the performance issues and FPS problems, this mainly has to do with the game's engine, which came out in 2013, but still, to this day, compared to other games that have recently come out, Arma 3 looks beautiful and has tons of realistic textures. But going back to what I said with the engine, it's old and outdated and you need a pretty good CPU to run it. Even with the problems the game has, it's still an amazing game that I'll always consistently come back to with my friends and make ridiculous missions for us to inevitably fail due to our stupidity.